If there is one driver who isn't particularly happy with how things have developed in the last couple of days, that has to be Charles Leclerc. The Monegasque is currently having major issues with Frederic Vasseur, the man brought in primarily to use his influence with Ferrari to get rid of Binotto. After everyone thought that Leclerc would be the preferred number one driver at Ferrari, Vasseur changed his mind. On top of that, Leclerc's future at Ferrari isn't even secured beyond 2024. In a very interesting twist of events, Leclerc could see one of his best friends and old mentors on the grid, Frederic Vasseur, turn into his nemesis really quick. Remember, Leclerc used to work under Vasseur at Alfa Romeo in 2018, in his amazing debut in Formula 1, just before he got promoted to Ferrari. And this was one of the reasons why many thought that with the arrival of Vasseur, Sainz would be the endangered driver and Leclerc would be automatically designated as the number one choice of the team. Still, this is very unlikely to happen, and even though Vasseur himself said that he prefers a number 1 and number 2 driver in his team, because that's how all championships have been won in the past, we are in for a huge surprise. Before we dive deeper into that, let's see what Vasseur had to say regarding the reliability of the car and the current focus of Ferrari. The Frenchman is set to embark on a legendary journey, one that would see him guide one of the most successful teams in the sport, Ferrari, back to glory and championships. He definitely has the drivers in order to achieve this mission, but what he doesn't have is the reliability of the engine. This is something that was massively worked on in 2022, and although Binotto likely fixed the issues before he left the team, we cannot be 100% sure until we see the 2023 Challenger take on the roads. Vasseur believes that the drivers will be granted with a good car, which is why he then added that, in his opinion, there won't be designated number 1 and number 2 drivers, and he will take action if one needs to be taken. This is something that had triggered Leclerc and his fans, and to add salt to the wound, Vasseur further spoke about Leclerc's contract, but we'll get to that later in this video. First, let's see what he has to say about the reliability of the engine. Regarding the engine, the numbers, I don't know where those numbers are coming from, but it's just a joke. We've made some step for power unit, but it's just about reliability. I think the performance last year was not an issue at all, but the issue was the reliability, and the first target is to fix it. So far, it looks okay, but the reality on the track is a different perspective. I think that a couple of issues that the team suffered from, and it's not only true for Ferrari in terms of reliability, are also coming from the bouncing and vibration. Everybody will have a much better picture in Bahrain. Now that he's thrown away the claims that Ferrari will have an extra 30 horsepower in 2023 and said that the vibrations and the bouncing are still something that they need to work on, the Maranello team isn't in quite the best position to battle with Red Bull. There were a couple of statements from the FIA, more precisely from Nicolas Tambazis, that the new regulations that are supposed to hit the grid from 2023 on aren't 100% secured to eradicate the aerodynamical phenomenon of porpoising. This would eventually mean that the grid will remain as competitive as it was in 2022, and we all remember how difficult it was for Ferrari to even keep up with Mercedes at the end of the season, let alone challenge Red Bull for the championship. That is one of the reasons why Leclerc and Sainz were let in to race fair and square, and according to all indications, this is something that will happen in 2023 as well. Why is this bad news for Leclerc? Remember, the Monegasque got outperformed in 2021, which was Sainz's first season with Ferrari, and in 2022, Sainz has shown much more maturity and shot-calling abilities compared to Leclerc. Although Leclerc finished ahead of Sainz, the competitiveness between these two has always been close, and now that Vasseur said that his contract isn't the team's priority, it could very well be a season of proving who's better. When talking about Leclerc and the extension that he needs to sign with Ferrari, Vasseur said, "I know both drivers quite well, and I think we still have some time before we start talking about the future. For me today, this is not the number 1 priority. We have to start the season very well, then there will be time for the rest. I think it would be a mistake to start negotiations at a time when the priority is another one." Well, there you have it. Leclerc is definitely not the designated number 1 driver for Ferrari, and what's even scarier for him is that he is definitely not Vasseur's pet, as everyone has labeled him prior to the season. People often forget that Vasseur previously coached Sainz in Formula 1, specifically in 2017 when both of them joined Renault. But what has Vasseur said that is going to make Leclerc and his fans mad? Obviously, it gives Sainz a lot of hope, and he went from being linked to Audi in 2026 to potentially becoming Ferrari's number 1 driver and eventually winning a championship with the Maranello team. When talking about the designated roles for Ferrari, Vasseur said, "I think it's the same everywhere, that we have two very good drivers and both of them are able to do the job. We will have the capacity to provide them with exactly the same car and the same structure and the same support." What is clear is that the target is to win with Ferrari. There will be no number 1 or number 2. But if at one stage we have to take action, I will take action. It doesn't matter if it's one or the other, but if at one stage in the season I have to do something, then I will do it. Leclerc hasn't really shown a lot of potential when it comes to decision making, and this is something that Sainz has been absolutely brilliant at. Remember, he is the one that called his own shots in Silverstone and in Monaco, and we know how those races ended up for him. He won at Silverstone and almost won at Monaco if it hadn't been for Albon in front of him trying to find secure space to let the Spaniard go. On the other hand, Leclerc was way too reliant on his team, and that is something that lost him a lot of positions in his championship quest. Sure, Sainz suffered more from drivers' mistakes and other drivers crashing into him, such as Ricciardo in Imola, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Ferrari has the most competitive duo on the grids. This is why we are in for a very interesting season, one that Leclerc had hoped would not take the turns it has. When talking about the relationship that he and Sainz have, Vasseur had nothing but praise for the Spaniard, calling him one of the best drivers on the grid, and even going to the extent of saying that he wanted to sign him to Sauber, but that wasn't possible at that time. Furthermore, he added, "We have always had a very good relationship. I trust him, and I think he showed in the last couple of years that he is a potential winner. But it's very important for the team that we don't have a number 1 and a number 2. The organization is crystal clear, but they have to do their job. And if at any stage I have to take action for Carlos and for Charles, I will do it." With this in mind, a very interesting season lies ahead of us, and if Ferrari somehow manages to be ahead of Red Bull in terms of pace and performance, it goes without saying that the Maranello team will definitely have very interesting races between both of their drivers. The last thing that the team would want is to have the 2016 competitiveness level that happened at Mercedes, and therefore this is something that Vasseur needs to desperately work on. After all, he has been very grateful for how Binotto handed him over the organization, and it could be that the Swiss engineer said some things about Leclerc and Sainz, which is why Vasseur changed his opinion about the designated number 1 and number 2 drivers on the grid. But he also needs to be very careful, because if Leclerc doesn't continue his contract with Ferrari, Toto Wolff and Mercedes are lurking in the shadows and are going to use this momentum in their own favor. What do you think about Vasseur's statements on Leclerc? Do you believe they're valid and that Leclerc will lose his position as team leader? Let us know in the comments below.